Hello and welcome to more history stuff. Recently I've been making a few videos about English history in the 13th century during the reigns of Henry III and Edward I. Today I want to change tack a bit and make the first of a series of videos about one of the most interesting Welsh political figures of this era, and his name was Griffith ap Gwenwynwyn, and he was the Lord of Southern Powys. Powys is in mid Wales. It's a big chunk of territory in mid-Wales, bordering next to the English border, or the Marches as it was called. It used to be a single unified territory, but in the mid to late 12th century it was broken up. And what you end up with is two main lordships, Southern Powys, or Powys Gwenwynwyn, which is held by Griffith's family, and Northern Powys, or Powys Vadog, which is held by a separate dynasty. And then just to complicate matters further, you've got all kinds of sort of lesser lordships and lesser dynasties in places like Mechane and Deiddwr and other places. So it's a bit of a patchwork of different lordships by the time you get to the mid-13th century. So who was Griffith and why was he so interesting? Well, Griffith was one of the very few Welsh princes to survive the conquest of Wales by Edward I in 1282, and he not only survives but he prospers. He does very well, and he dies in his bed, which not many Welsh princes do during this era, at quite an advanced age, and he leaves an intact inheritance to pass on to his sons, which in the context of the time, this being such a time of such upheaval in Wales, is quite some achievement. So he's a bit of a success story, Griffith, but he's not a very highly regarded figure. Certainly not in the past 200 years. Many Welsh historians haven't got a great deal good to say about him. To give a few examples, and I should say to begin with that I am working largely from this book, excellent source book, Medieval Powys by David Stevenson. Came out a few years ago, but it's a really, really good book and one I keep returning to. So in terms of Griffith's historical reputation, to give a fairly extreme example, in 1905 a chap named Owen Roscommil brought out a book called Flame Bearers of Welsh History, aimed primarily at Welsh schoolchildren. And he describes Griffith as the traitor Griffith, son of Gwenwynwyn of traitor memory. So far as Owen Roscommil was concerned, Griffith and his father and the dynasty of Southern Powys are traitors. They are turncoats, and he's got nothing good to say about them. And this opinion is found in other Welsh histories. For instance, Sir John Lloyd, who was a far more prominent and significant historian than someone like Owen Roscommil. Even he says that the realm of Powys was not fitted by nature to play a heroic part in the conflict between Welsh and English. So this impression that there was a heroic role to play, and that the lords of Powys, in particular the family of Griffith, failed to fulfil that, really, and that they're traitors. They're a family who chose to side with the English and undermine any hope of a united and independent Welsh nation. Is quite a persistent one. It's something that hangs over the historical reputation of this particular family, which I think is unfair and far too simplistic. And as usual with most of the sort of events and the people of this era, when you look a little bit closer and you look at their background and their circumstances and their reasons for making the decisions that they made, it's a lot more complicated than that. So we'll talk about Griffith's background a little bit. His father, Gwenwynwyn, was a major political figure of his day in the late 12th century, early 13th century. And like many of the lords of Powys, he tries to walk this very difficult tightrope between playing off the lords of Gwynedd and the kings of England against each other in order to keep Powys intact. Because if you look at Powys as a political and geographic unit, it is sandwiched between two very aggressive, ambitious, expansionist states. To the west you've got Gwynedd and the lords of Gwynedd. From the really from the mid-12th century onwards, they make determined efforts to unite the whole of Wales under their banner, and they don't always do this by peaceful means. Certainly not in Powys. They repeatedly invade Powys from the era of Owain Gwynedd onwards, all through the eras of Llywelyn the Great and Dafydd ap Llywelyn, Llywelyn ap Griffith. Over about 100 years, Powys suffers very badly. It is repeatedly invaded and occupied and plundered by the lords of Gwynedd. At times, the lords of Powys manage to conciliate the lords of Gwynedd. They ally with them, but just as often they're at conflict with them. They're at war. And then, of course, to the east, you've got the kings of England, the power of the English crown, and the kings of England are forever trying to play this game of divide and rule in Wales. They want to extend their power into Wales, and the easiest way to do that is to get the native princes to fight each other. And this is certainly true of Powys. Henry II, for instance, he pays the lords of Powys a great deal of money to fight Gwynedd on his behalf. He does this over a period of about 30 years. Pays a considerable amount of money to all these Powysian princes to sort of hold Powys as a buffer state to guard England against Gwynedd and to expand into Gwynedd. And Griffith's father, Gwenwynwyn, is this very ambitious, very capable, unusually competent Powysian prince, who has a very long career full of ups and downs, in which he, right up until the end, is a very clever, canny politician, very smooth operator. He manages to make the right decisions most of the time. He knows when to support the princes of Gwynedd, when to break with them and support the kings of England, and when to switch sides. He can always tell which way the wind is blowing, and to try and expand his own sort of power at the same time. Unfortunately, in about 1216, his luck runs out. He finally makes the wrong decision. He backs the wrong horse. He chooses to support King John. And John, by this point, is in terrible trouble. England has been invaded by the French. His power in England is crumbling away, and his power in North Wales is disintegrating even quicker than that. And Llywelyn the Great, Llywelyn ap Mathuroth of Gwynedd, is sweeping the English and their allies out of North Wales. And this includes Gwenwynwyn, Griffith's father. In 1216, he is forced to flee. He is driven out of Wales altogether. He and his family have to go into exile in England, and his lands are occupied and effectively conquered by the Prince of Gwynedd. And this is the backdrop to Griffith's life. He is one of the three sons of Gwenwynwyn. The others are Owain Madog. Griffith is the second son. Owain is his eldest brother. And the family are forced to take refuge in England, which is quite a common occurrence. Whenever the Princes of Gwynedd defeat one of their enemies in Wales, their enemies almost always go into England and live in exile and seek refuge with the King of England, which is logical, really, because there's nowhere else to go. England is the obvious place to seek refuge. And the English kings, the kings of England, of course, are all too happy to take in useful waifs and strays and fugitives from Wales, because they can then use them as tools against the princes of Gwynedd and continue playing this game of divide and rule. So this is what happens to the dynasty of Southern Powys in the last days of the reign of King John. John dies, 1216. Griffith, or rather Gwenwynwyn, doesn't last much longer. And he leaves 3 sons who are raised on the manor of Ashford in Derbyshire. This land is granted to them by John's successor, Henry III. And this, you have to bear in mind, is an enormous humiliation for Griffith and his brothers. They will have been raised fully aware of their ancestry, of the history of their dynasty, the House of Mathuroth, as they are called. This is a very ancient royal Welsh house, princely house. The history of the dynasty goes back centuries before the Norman conquest. And they are very much aware of their ancestral pride and what they've lost, because their father has suffered a devastating defeat. He was forced to abandon his lands in Powys. The princes of Gwynedd have taken everything. Their troops, their followers, have now seized everything in Powys. And the fortunes of Griffith's dynasty are shattered. They lie in ruins. And this is the background to Griffith's life. This is his childhood, his upbringing, the situation he finds himself in at the very earliest stage of his life. And in that context, it seems very unfair for future historians 500-600 years down the line who didn't really make much of an effort, I think, to look at Griffith's background and why he becomes the man that he becomes, to call him a traitor. A traitor to who and to what? How can you be a traitor to a rival dynasty that has ruined your father, stolen your lands, slaughtered all your warriors and your servants, and driven you to seek this very humiliating exile in a foreign land and live off the charity, really, of a foreign king? Griffith and his brothers are entirely at the mercy of the King of England, Henry III, who can move them about and favour them or withdraw his favour and manipulate them in any way he chooses. They are these 3 boys. They're entirely at the mercy of others. So that's the situation that Griffith finds himself in at the start of his life, and it's far from ideal. It's very difficult, and most people born into that situation would really struggle to get out of it, to make anything of it at all. Just to survive would be an achievement. But as future videos, I hope, will illustrate, Griffith is not content to just be a survivor. He is an exceptionally strong-willed, intelligent, ambitious character. And he really he resurrects his dynasty from the ashes, if you like. So that's the backdrop, and I hope that's given some idea of where Griffith was coming from and the things that forged his character and his behaviour in life and in his political career. And I'll move on to the next stage in the next video, hopefully. Speak to you later.